Ambassador Velkith had served the Galactic Concordance for nearly 200 years. In that time, he had met species from every corner of the galaxy. He had spoken with beings made of living crystal. He had negotiated with hive minds that controlled entire star systems. He had even survived a meeting with the Kroth, a warrior race that decorated their ships with the bones of their enemies. Nothing had ever truly scared him. That changed on the day he met the humans. The humans had been discovered by accident. A Concordance survey ship had picked up strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet on the outer edge of the galaxy. The signals were primitive, just electromagnetic waves bouncing off into space. Most species in the Concordance had passed through such a phase millions of years ago. The survey team expected to find simple creatures, perhaps building their first cities or learning to use fire. Instead, they found something much stranger. The humans had already reached their own moon. They had built machines that could think. They had weapons that could level entire cities in seconds. And most disturbing of all, they had already used those weapons on themselves. Velkith received the survey report and read it 3 times. He was certain there had been some mistake. No species could advance so quickly while constantly trying to destroy itself. It defied every model of civilization development the Concordance had ever created. But the report was accurate. The humans were real. And now they had found a crashed Concordance probe and were using it to build faster-than-light engines. The High Council sent Velkith to make first contact. His mission was simple: assess the humans, determine their threat level, and recommend integration into the Concordance. It should have been routine. Velkith had done this exact job dozens of times before. He arrived on Earth in what the humans called the year 2157. Their planet was beautiful but scarred. Green forests and blue oceans covered much of the surface, but there were also gray patches of dead land and cities that glowed with pollution. The humans had not been kind to their world. Velkith met with a delegation of human leaders in a place called Geneva. The humans seemed friendly enough. They smiled often and asked many questions about the galaxy. They were curious, almost childlike in their wonder. Velkith began to relax. Perhaps the survey report had exaggerated the danger. Then he asked about their history. The human diplomat. Across from him was a woman named Director Chun. She had gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to see right through him. When Velkith asked about human conflicts, those calm eyes lit up with something he could not quite identify. "We've had our share of wars," she said simply. Velkith nodded. Every species had wars. It was part of development. "How did you resolve them?" Director Chun smiled. It was not a warm smile. "We ended our largest war by splitting the atom and dropping 2 bombs on our own cities." Velkith's translator must have malfunctioned. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "We created weapons that harnessed the fundamental forces of the universe," Chun explained. "The first time we used them, we killed over 200,000 of our own kind in a few seconds. We did this twice, to 2 different cities in the same week." Velkith felt his stomach turn. "And this ended the war?" "It did. The enemy surrendered shortly after." "I see." Velkith tried to keep his voice steady. "And this was your most destructive conflict?" Chun actually laughed at that. "Not even close. About 30 years before that, we had a war that killed 17 million people. And 20 years before that, we had another one that killed 20 million. Those were just the major ones. We've had hundreds of smaller conflicts throughout our history." Velkith's hands were shaking. He gripped his datapad tighter to hide it. "But surely, after discovering atomic weapons, your species stopped fighting." "For a while, yes. But then, 2 of our largest nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to destroy our entire planet many times over. We called this mutually assured destruction. Both sides knew that if either one attacked, everyone would die. So neither side attacked. You made peace through the threat of total extinction? We called it the Cold War. It lasted about 50 years. Velkith stared at her. In all his centuries of diplomatic work, he had never heard anything like this. The humans had discovered the most destructive force in the universe and immediately used it to kill each other. When that failed to destroy them, they built more weapons. When those weapons became too terrible to use, they pointed them at each other and called the resulting standoff peace. This was not how civilizations were supposed to work. Director Chan, Velkith said carefully, how is your species still alive? She shrugged. We're stubborn. That night, Velkith returned to his ship and began writing his report. His hands still shook as he typed. He had assessed hundreds of species for integration into the concordance. He had never recommended rejection. Every species, no matter how violent or strange, could be reasoned with eventually. But the humans were different. The humans did not fear death the way other species did. They had proven this again and again throughout their history. They would destroy themselves rather than surrender. They would poison their own world rather than let an enemy have it. They would stare into the abyss of extinction and somehow find the will to keep going. Velkith did not recommend rejection. He was too afraid of what might happen if he did. Instead, he wrote 3 words at the top of his report: approach with extreme caution. The High Council of the Galactic Concordance met in the ancient chambers of Station Prime. The room was built to impress, with walls of living crystal that shifted colors with the mood of the discussion. Today, those walls glowed a deep and troubled red. 12 counselors sat in a circle around a holographic display. Each one represented a major species in the concordance. Together, they governed over 8,000 worlds and trillions of beings. They had faced wars, plagues, and the collapse of stars. They believed they had seen everything the universe could throw at them. They were wrong. Ambassador Velkith stood at the center of the circle, presenting his report on the humans. He had been speaking for nearly an hour. With each new detail, the walls grew darker and the counselors grew more silent. Let me understand this correctly, said Counselor Thrin of the Morth hegemony. His species were proud warriors who had conquered a dozen systems before joining the Concordance. He was not easily frightened. These humans nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons, and then they built more of them? Many more, Velkith confirmed. At their peak, they had enough weapons to destroy their entire planet several times over. And they pointed these weapons at each other? Yes, for 50 of their years. 2 major factions threatened to end their entire species rather than allow the other faction to win. They called this strategy mutually assured destruction. Thrin's scales rippled with unease. And yet they still exist. They do. They eventually reduced their weapons stockpiles, but they never eliminated them completely. They still maintain enough nuclear capability to devastate their own world. The council fell silent. Counselor Aurelia of the Synthesis Collective spoke next. Their species were logical beings who had long ago merged with their machines. They valued reason above all else. Their behavior is irrational, she said. No species should invest such resources into weapons they cannot use. The threat of self-destruction is not a sustainable diplomatic strategy. I agree, said Velkith. Yet it worked. The humans avoided major conflict for decades through this strategy alone. Perhaps they are simply insane, Thrin suggested. Perhaps. But their insanity has proven remarkably effective. Velkith pulled up another section of his report. Consider their economic development. During the same period they were threatening nuclear annihilation. They also landed on their moon, created global communication networks, and doubled their population. They did not let the constant threat of death slow their progress. Counselor Dreth of the Kindari raised a long, thin appendage. His species were ancient beings who had watched countless civilizations rise and fall. They rarely spoke in council meetings, but when they did, everyone listened. "I have seen many dangerous species in my time," Dreth said slowly. "The Vraks were killers. The Thorm were conquerors. The Blind Lords were destroyers. But all of them could be understood. They wanted power or resources or simply to survive. Their violence had purpose." He paused, his ancient eyes fixed on the holographic images of human history. "These humans are different. They do not simply use violence to achieve goals. They have made violence itself into a philosophy. They study war. They teach it in schools. They write books about the most efficient ways to kill each other. And then they go home and raise families as if none of it matters." "What are you suggesting?" Aurelia asked. "I am suggesting that we cannot predict them. A rational species calculates costs and benefits before acting. An irrational species acts without thought. But these humans do both at once. They calculate the cost of destroying themselves, and then they choose to risk it anyway. This makes them the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." The council chamber was completely silent now. Thryn spoke first. "Then we must destroy them before they grow stronger." "Impossible," Velkith replied. "They have already reverse-engineered faster than light travel from our crash probe. If we attack, they will fight back. And as I have shown, they will not stop fighting until one side is completely destroyed. Then what do you propose?" Velkith took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been dreading. "I propose we welcome them into the Concordance." The walls flashed with outrage. Several counselors began speaking at once. Thryn slammed his fist on the table. "You want to bring these monsters into our alliance?" "I want to keep them from becoming our enemies," Velkith said firmly. "Consider the alternative. If we reject them, they will continue to develop on their own. Within a few centuries, they will be our equals in technology. Within a millennium, they may surpass us. And when that day comes, they will remember that we turned them away." The council fell silent again. They understood the logic, even if they hated it. "But we cannot simply treat them as equals," Aurelia said. "The risk is too great." "I agree. That is why I am proposing the Threshold Doctrine." Velkith activated a new display. It showed a detailed plan for managing the human species. Restricted access to core systems, limited military presence, careful monitoring of their technological development, and one absolute rule above all others. "We must never give them a reason to view us as an existential threat," Velkith said. "Because if they do, they will respond the same way they have always responded to such threats. They will be willing to destroy everything, including themselves, to win." The Threshold Doctrine was approved that day. It would govern human concordance relations for the next 3 centuries. And in all that time, no one would forget what the humans were capable of. 300 years passed after the Threshold Doctrine was put in place. In that time, humanity spread across the outer rim of the galaxy like water flowing into empty spaces. They built colonies on worlds that other species had deemed too harsh. They established trade routes through regions of space that others found too dangerous. They thrived where they should have died. The older species of the Concordance remembered why the restrictions existed. They remembered the stories of human wars, of nuclear weapons, of mutually assured destruction. But the younger species had never seen humans fight. They only knew them as traders and explorers, as friendly neighbors who laughed easily and asked too many questions. Some began to call for the end of the Threshold Doctrine. It seemed outdated, they said. The humans had proven themselves peaceful. Why should they still be treated as potential threats? The old counselors refused to change the policy, but they could feel the pressure growing. Perhaps they had been wrong about the humans after all. Perhaps 3 centuries of peace had changed them. Then the Vreth arrived. They came from beyond the galaxy, from the vast darkness between star clusters. No one knew where they had originated. No one knew how long they had been traveling. They simply appeared at the edge of concordant space and began to consume everything in their path. The Vreth were not like any species the concordants had ever encountered. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not even seem to think in any way the concordants could understand. They simply spread like a disease from system to system. Every world they touched was stripped bare. Every species they encountered was destroyed. The concordants had fought wars before. They had defeated powerful enemies and absorbed aggressive species into their alliance. They believed they could do the same with the Vreth. They were wrong. The first major battle took place at the Helium Barrier, a defensive line of fortified stations and patrol fleets. The Concordance had positioned its finest warships there, commanded by its most experienced admirals. They expected a difficult fight, but they were confident in their superior technology and tactics. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Concordance fleet was destroyed. Not defeated, not pushed back, destroyed. Every ship was torn apart. Every station was consumed. 90 million soldiers died in a single afternoon. The Vreth did not pause to celebrate their victory. They simply continued their advance. Panic spread through the Concordance. System after system fell before the unstoppable tide. Refugee ships clogged the transit routes. Species that had lived in peace for millennia suddenly found themselves facing extinction. The High Council met in emergency session after emergency session, but they had no answers. Their weapons were useless against the Vreth swarms. Their strategies were outdated. Their admirals were dead. Finally, Counselor Aurelia suggested the unthinkable. We must consult the humans. The chamber fell silent. The Threshold Doctrine had specific provisions for moments like this. In the event of an existential threat to the Concordance, human military expertise could be requested. But no one had ever expected that provision to be used. They have not fought a major war in 3 centuries, Thrun argued. What could they possibly offer? They have not fought a war because we did not let them, Aurelia replied. But they have not forgotten how. Their military academies still teach the old strategies. Their soldiers still train for conflicts we can barely imagine. They have been waiting for this moment, whether they knew it or not. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. A message was sent to the human colonies. Within a day, a human delegation arrived at Station Prime. They were led by a woman named Admiral Chun, a descendant of the director who had first met Ambassador Velketh 3 centuries ago. She had the same calm eyes as her ancestor, the same quiet confidence. The council explained the situation. They showed her the footage of the Helium Barrier massacre. They displayed maps of the Vreth advance. They described the billions of lives already lost and the trillions more at risk. Admiral Chun listened without interrupting. When the council finished, she asked a single question. What are you willing to sacrifice to survive? The counselors looked at each other in confusion. They did not understand the question. Chun leaned forward. You have been at peace for too long. You have forgotten what war really costs. If we fight this enemy for you, we will not do it gently. We will not worry about preserving beautiful worlds or minimizing civilian casualties. We will do whatever is necessary to win. Can you accept that? Counselor Dreth, oldest of them all, answered for the council. We can accept anything except extinction. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. For a moment, something flickered in her calm eyes. It might have been satisfaction. It might have been sadness. It was impossible to tell. Then we will fight for you, she said. But remember, you asked for this. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Within hours, human ships began moving toward the front lines. The Concordance had unleashed something they did not fully understand. They were about to learn what humans were truly capable of. The human counteroffensive did not begin with a battle. It began with Math. Admiral Chun gathered the best human strategists and analysts and locked them in a room with every piece of data the Concordance had collected about the Vreth. For 3 days, they studied the enemy. They mapped their movements. They analyzed their feeding patterns. They calculated their reproductive rates. On the 4th day, Chun emerged with a plan. The Vreth are not unstoppable, she announced to the assembled Concordance commanders. They are simply efficient. They consume resources faster than any ecosystem can replace them. This is why they keep moving forward. They have no choice. If they stop, they starve. The commanders looked at each other with hope in their eyes. Perhaps this would be easier than they thought. However, Chung continued, they currently have enough momentum to consume this entire galaxy before they run out of fuel. To stop them, we need to break their supply lines and slow their advance long enough for attrition to take effect. How long will that take? Thrin asked. At minimum 40 years. During that time, we will lose approximately 200 billion lives. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. That is unacceptable, Thrin said. We must find another way. Chun shook her head. There is no other way. This is the cost of victory. We calculated it very precisely. If you want to survive, this is what you must pay. The Concordance commanders argued. They pleaded. They demanded alternatives. Chun waited patiently until they exhausted themselves. My ancestors faced similar choices, she said quietly. In a war called World War II, they knew that defeating the enemy would cost millions of lives. They paid that price. In the Cold War, they knew that protecting their nations might mean destroying the world. They accepted that risk. We do not enjoy this calculus, but we know how to do it. She looked around the room at the alien faces, seeing fear and confusion in everyone. You brought us here because you forgot how to fight. We never forgot. Now follow our lead or watch your civilization die. The Concordance followed. The war lasted 43 years. It was fought across thousands of star systems, and it cost more lives than any conflict in galactic history. But the humans have been right. The Vreth could be stopped. They just needed someone willing to pay the price. Human commanders made decisions that horrified their Concordance allies. They abandoned entire planets rather than waste resources defending them. They launched attacks that killed millions of their own soldiers just to gain strategic advantages. They poisoned worlds that were about to fall so the Vreth could not use them for food. The Concordance species could not understand such ruthlessness. They saw their human allies as monsters, almost as terrible as the enemy they were fighting. But slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Vreth advance slowed. Their swarms grew thinner. Their attacks became less coordinated. The strategy was working. After 40 years of grinding warfare, human intelligence located the Vreth Queen Nexus, the central node that coordinated the entire swarm. It was buried deep in a heavily defended system, surrounded by billions of Vreth warriors. A conventional attack would cost trillions of lives and might still fail. Admiral Chun, now old and gray, but still calm as ever, proposed a different approach. I will take a ship loaded with antimatter directly into the Nexus, she said. The explosion will destroy the Queen and end the war. The Concordance commanders protested. Such an action was suicide. No species in the history of the galaxy had ever deliberately sacrificed their own leader in such a way. This is not sacrifice, Chun replied. This is efficiency. My life for the galaxy. The math is simple. She called for volunteers. 16,000 humans stepped forward without hesitation. They knew they were going to die. They went anyway. Chun's final transmission was recorded and preserved in the Concordance archives. It showed her sitting calmly at the helm of her ship as it plunged into the heart of the Vreth swarm. Her voice was steady, almost bored, as she gave her final orders. There was no fear, no regret. She had made peace with death long ago. So had everyone aboard. The explosion lit up the entire sector. When the light faded, the Vreth Queen was gone. Without her guidance, the remaining swarms fell into chaos. Within a year, they were hunted down and destroyed. The war was over. The Concordance had survived thought in the aftermath. Some called for the humans to be honored as saviors. They had done what no other species could do. They had paid a price that no other species would pay. They deserved recognition, but the older counselors remembered the look in Admiral Chun's eyes when she described acceptable losses. They remembered the cold efficiency with which human commanders had sacrificed their own soldiers. They remembered that the humans had not hesitated, not even for a moment, when asked to destroy themselves. The threshold doctrine was not relaxed. It was strengthened. New restrictions were added. New monitoring systems were put in place. The humans were thanked for their service and politely encouraged to return to their outer rim colonies. The Concordance was grateful to be alive, but they understood, finally and completely, why their ancestors had been so afraid. The humans were not terrifying because they were violent. Every species could be violent when threatened. The humans were terrifying because they had already faced the worst of themselves. They had already looked into the darkness of their own nature and found the strength to keep going. They knew exactly how far they were willing to go because they had already been there. Other species feared extinction. Humans had learned to use that fear as a tool. They had built entire philosophies around it. They had created systems of thought that calculated acceptable losses and strategic sacrifices. They had turned terror into policy. The universe was vast and full of dangers. The Concordance was grateful that the humans were on their side, and they were absolutely determined to keep it that way, because they had seen what happened when humans decided something was an existential threat. They never wanted to be on the other side of that calculation.